The frost on the window pane was an intricate map of a cold, unknown country. Madeline Kine traced its contours with her eyes, sipping her Earl Grey. The old Victorian on Hemlock Street held its breath around her, every creak and groan a familiar note in the symphony of her solitude. 5 years without Arthur. 5 years of silence. The phone's shriek tore the stillness to shreds. "Gran, listen!" Her grandson Evan's voice was a strained wire, vibrating with pure panic. "You can't get on the 8:15. Not today. Promise me." The 8:15. The 13. Her train. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter morning seeped into her bones. "Evan, what?" "Promise me, just not the 13, he begged, and the terror in his voice was so absolute, so foreign, that she acquiesced. "All right, sweetheart, I promise." The dial tone was a verdict. She stood, unmoored, in her own kitchen. The day stretched ahead, a derailed train. She told herself it was a silly premonition, but the seed of dread had been planted. She decided to work from home, to lose herself in the mundane task of sorting through old boxes in the attic, a task she'd avoided for years. The news came via a frantic text from another neighbor. There'd been an incident at the station. A woman pushed in front of the 8:15. Madeline's world tilted. She sank onto the bottom step of the attic stairs, the phone shaking in her hand. It wasn't a premonition. It was a warning, and she was the intended target. The following hours were a blur of police and platitudes. Detective Brody, a woman with eyes like blue ice, asked why she'd changed her routine. Madeline lied, protecting Evan's frantic, unexplained call. Her son Robert and his wife Stephanie arrived, a whirlwind of manufactured concern and not so subtle pressure. "This house is too much for you, Madeline," Stephanie said, her gaze already appraising the crown molding, calculating the square footage. "It's time to be sensible." The pressure intensified. Official-looking letters began to arrive, a property tax discrepancy, a notice about a deed transfer she didn't remember signing. The walls of her own life were closing in, the bureaucracy a weapon aimed at her heart. Robert looked helpless, trapped between his mother and his wife's relentless ambition. One evening, searching for an old photo album to prove to herself that her memories were still her own, Madeline pulled a heavy cardboard box from the back of a closet. Beneath a stack of Arthur's old sweaters, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. A small black USB drive. It was tucked inside a folded map of the town, a place she hadn't looked at in decades. Her breath hitched. This wasn't hers. It had been hidden, placed. Somewhere in the town, a siren wailed, its pitch rising, coming closer. Much too close. Madeline Kine slowly raised her head, the cold weight of the flash drive solid and terrifying in her palm. This was no longer about a train or a house. This was about a truth someone had killed to bury, and she was now holding it in her hand. "No," she whispered into the waiting silence of the house. "This is only the beginning." The digitalis was a thief in the night. It didn't announce itself with pain, but with a slow, insidious unraveling of the world. One moment, Madeline was reaching for the kettle. The next, the familiar checkerboard of her kitchen floor was tilting, the squares swimming into a nauseating vortex of black and white. A cold sweat bloomed on her skin, and a deafening roar filled her ears, the sound of her own heart stuttering and crashing against her ribs. Her last conscious thought was not of fear, but of a fierce, burning rage. They are in my house. They are in my tea. Her hand, clumsy and numb, managed to knock the phone from its cradle. The world shrank to the distant, tinny voice of the 911 operator before everything went dark. She surfaced in the sterile whiteness of a hospital room, her body feeling like a wrung-out rag. Robert and Stephanie were a blur at her bedside, their faces masks of concern that didn't reach their eyes. Stephanie's was a perfect performance of wifely duty, but her gaze was sharp, assessing, like a surgeon evaluating a successful incision. "Mom, you gave us such a scare," Robert said, his voice thick with a genuine terror that seemed to war with something else. Shame, perhaps. The doctor, a young man with a kind, tired face, explained it all. Digitalis, a heart medication, in her system. It could mimic a fatal heart attack. "Do you have any idea how you could have ingested it, Mrs. Kine?" Madeline's eyes locked with Stephanie's. "No," she whispered, the lie tasting like ash. "No idea." It was later, when Detective Brody visited, that the second trap was sprung. The detective's demeanor was different, colder, more official. "Mrs. Kine, we've been looking into the financial angles of your case. There's evidence of forged documents. And your grandson, Evan, his bank records show several large, recent deposits, unexplained. We can't find him. He's vanished." The world didn't just tilt. It shattered. They were framing Evan. They were painting him as the desperate grandson, manipulating his grandmother, perhaps even orchestrating the murder to get the house sooner, and now attempting to poison her to speed up the process. It was diabolical in its elegance. It explained everything to the outside world. It was a story people would believe. That night, lying in the hospital bed with the phantom taste of poison on her tongue, Madeline Kine shed the last vestiges of the woman she had been. The grieving widow, the retired teacher, the gentle grandmother, they were luxuries she could no longer afford. Someone had to be the warrior now. The silence around Evan's disappearance was a scream. He was out there, alone and terrified, trying to prove their innocence. She had to find him. When the nurse brought her personal effects, the phone in the plastic bag felt like a lifeline. Its battery was blinking red, a dying ember of hope. And then it flickered with a new message, an unknown number. A grainy black and white photo of the old Crestwood Lumber Social Club, a place of ghosts and memories. Scrawled over it, a time, 11:30 p.m., tonight. It was him. Getting out was a lesson in quiet desperation. She pleaded exhaustion, sent Robert and Stephanie home with a performance of frail gratitude. When the night shift settled into its rhythm of soft footsteps and hushed voices, she moved. She dressed in the clothes from her bag, her limbs heavy and weak, but her will a newly forged blade. She was a shadow slipping past the nurse's station, a wisp of camel hair coat disappearing through a side door into the biting cold. The social club was a tomb. The wind whistled through broken windows, carrying the scent of decay and frozen memories. The side entrance, the one she and Arthur had used to sneak away for a private moment during a long-ago dance, groaned in protest, but yielded. Inside, the moonlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the ghost of a dance floor where they had once swayed to a forgotten tune. "Gran?" The whisper came from the depths of the shadows near the old splintered bar. Evan emerged, a pale, gaunt version of the boy she knew. He looked like a hunted animal, his eyes wide with a fear that broke her heart all over again. He rushed forward, catching her in a desperate, trembling hug. "You're okay. Thank God. When I heard about the hospital..." His voice cracked. "Evan, what is happening?" Madeline's voice was low and urgent, her hands gripping his arms. "The police think you were involved. They found money. It's a setup, Gran. All of it." The words poured out of him in a frantic, hushed torrent. "I overheard them. Aunt Stephanie and that guy from the zoning board, Markham, they were talking about the house, about how you'd never sell. They said you were a stubborn old relic who needed a push. Then I heard them planning the accident for the train. I called you as soon as I could, but I didn't have proof, just my word against my aunts and some corrupt officials. I was scared. I ran. The money in my account, I don't know how it got there. I swear." The final missing piece of the puzzle clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just familial greed. It was a syndicate. A quiet, efficient cancer operating within the very structures meant to protect the town. "You should have gone to the police, Evan," Madeline said, her heart aching for the burden he had carried alone. "And say what? That my aunt is a murderer? They'd never believe me. They'd think I was trying to frame her, especially with that money planted in my account. I've been hiding, trying to get proof. I have a flash drive. It's in the safe place. It has emails. Conversations are recorded on my phone. It's all there." A floorboard creaked behind them, a sound as sharp as a gunshot in the silence. A beam of powerful flashlight cut through the gloom, pinning them in its harsh, unforgiving glare. "Touching," a cool, familiar voice said. Stephanie stepped out from behind a crumbling pillar, her face a mask of icy contempt. Beside her was Carl Markham, his usual smarmy politician smile replaced by a grim businesslike expression. He was holding a small, sleek digital recorder. "You always were a sentimental boy, Evan," Stephanie said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Sneaking around, playing detective. You should have taken the money and kept your mouth shut." "You killed Jane," Madeline said, the words a flat, cold statement. The accusation hung in the frozen air. Stephanie shrugged, a small, cruel gesture. "A miscalculation. The coat was a nice touch, but you changed your routine. Unfortunate for Jane. Fortunate for us in a way. A natural death in your home, from a heart attack, would have been so much cleaner. Less messy questions." Markham stepped forward, his hands in the pockets of his expensive overcoat. "It doesn't have to be difficult, Madeline. The paperwork is already in motion. A few signatures and this all goes away. You can have a comfortable, quiet life in assisted living. We'll even drop the charges against your grandson. He'll just be a confused kid who got in over his head." He gestured with the recorder. "We have our own insurance now. A confession of your instability, your paranoia." Madeline felt Evan tense beside her. This was their true weapon. Not the push on the platform, not the poison, but the slow, legal, bureaucratic evisceration of her life. They would use her own voice, edited and twisted, against her. They would use the system to bury them. "And if I refuse?" Madeline asked, her voice quiet but steady as granite. Stephanie's smile was a predator's grin. "Then the police will find you here with Evan. They'll find the rest of the digitalis we planted in your house. They'll have the forged deeds, the money trail, your grandson's confession on this recorder about how you pressured him. and your own hysterical claims about a conspiracy. Who do you think they'll believe? A respected realtor and a city official? Or a frightened, confused old woman and a troubled boy facing murder charges? Madeline's hand, buried deep in the pocket of her coat, closed around the cool, hard plastic of her phone. She had fumbled for it in the dark as they entered, her thumb finding a single button and pressing it, holding it down. A desperate, silent prayer to the modern gods of technology. The screen, hidden in her pocket, glowed with a single pulsating red dot. Recording. "I don't know, Stephanie," Madeline said, her voice rising, clear and strong, projecting into the dusty silence. She needed to bait them, to make them confess to the device in her pocket. "You tell me, who will they believe when they hear you admit to murdering Jane McClain? When they hear you plot to have me declared incompetent so you can steal my home? When they hear Carl Markham abuse his public office for profit?" Stephanie laughed, a short, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "Hear? There's no one here to hear, Madeline. This ends tonight. Your word against ours, and your word," she sneered, "isn't worth much anymore. You tried to poison me." Madeline continued, pushing, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. "You planted evidence against my grandson. You're not just a thief, you're a murderer." "Necessary actions for a necessary outcome," Markham said, his voice cold and final. He took a step closer, holding up his own recorder. "The development of this town is bigger than your sentimental attachment to a crumbling house. Now, are you going to be sensible, or are we going to have to make this even more difficult for everyone? We have all the leverage, the law, the city, the perception. It's all on our side." The beam of a second flashlight, brighter and more official, sliced through the darkness from the main entrance, illuminating the dust motes like a shower of diamonds. "I think they've been quite sensible enough, Mr. Markham." A new voice rang out, firm and authoritative. Detective Allison Brody stepped into the open, her service weapon held steadily at her side. Behind her, several uniformed officers moved with practiced efficiency to surround Stephanie and Markham. "We heard everything, and for the record," she added, her eyes flicking to Madeline's pocket. "So did the recording device Mrs. Kine activated. A full and very damning confession. Yours, not hers." Stephanie's face underwent a terrifying transformation, from smug triumph to sheer, unadulterated shock. It was as if the very walls of her reality were collapsing. Markham began to sputter, his face purpling.
"This is entrapment. I'll have your badge. You have no right—"
The metallic click of the handcuffs cutting him off was the most satisfying sound Madeline had ever heard. "You have the right to remain silent," an officer began, and the words, so often heard on television, now sounded like a hymn of deliverance. The machine they had built and hidden behind was turning on them, its gears grinding them to dust. In the chaotic minutes that followed, as the two conspirators were led away, their carefully constructed world in ruins, Detective Brody approached Madeline and Evan. The detective's usual stern expression was softened by a glint of what looked like admiration. "It was a tremendous risk, Mrs. Kine," Brody said, her voice low. "Coming here alone, baiting them like that? You could have been hurt." Madeline, her body trembling now with the aftermath of adrenaline and relief, looked at Evan, who had an arm wrapped tightly around her. "I wasn't alone," she said simply. "And I had a feeling you wouldn't be far. The way you looked at me at the station, you knew it wasn't random from the start, didn't you?" Brody gave a curt nod. "The coat was too convenient. It felt staged. And I've had my eye on Markham and his circle for a while. Quiet, bureaucratic corruption. They've done this before, I suspect. Pressuring elderly homeowners, exploiting loopholes, but they'd never resorted to murder until now. We just never had the proof. Until you." She looked at Madeline with newfound respect. "You provided the key." The victory, however, was not the end. It was merely the beginning of a different kind of war. The legal battles were long and arduous. Stephanie and Markham hired expensive lawyers, fighting every piece of evidence, trying to have Madeline's recording thrown out. Robert was shattered, a man staring into the abyss of his own marriage, realizing the depth of the deception he had lived with. He came to his mother, not with excuses, but with a raw, broken apology and a determination to help her in any way he could. The road to rebuilding their relationship would be long, paved with guilt and grief, but for the first time in years, it was a road they were walking together. Evan was officially cleared, his name restored, but the shadow of the accusation would linger. He returned to school, older and wiser, his bond with his grandmother forged in fire, unbreakable. And Madeline? She did not get to simply return to her quiet life. The house on Hemlock Street was still hers, but it was now a fortress under a different kind of siege. Civil suits were filed. Anonymous letters questioned her mental state. The bureaucratic war was real, a relentless stream of paperwork, zoning challenges, and petty obstructions she knew were the last dying twitches of the beast Stephanie and Markham had served. One afternoon, sitting at Arthur's old desk, she began to write. Not a letter of complaint, but a manifesto, a statement of fact. She wrote about her house, her family, and the silent war being waged against the vulnerable in her town. She sent it to the local paper. To her surprise, they published it. The knock on her door a week later was not from a process server or a city inspector. It was from a young, ambitious reporter from a regional investigative journal, her eyes alight with the fire of a big story. "Mrs. Kine," the young woman said, "I read your piece. I think your story is just the tip of the iceberg. I'd like to help you dig deeper." Madeline looked past her to the street where the last of the winter snow was melting, revealing the stubborn green of the grass beneath. The 13th train had passed her by. The poison had not claimed her. The web of lies had been torn apart, but the fight for her home had revealed a much larger battlefield. She smiled, a small, weary but determined smile, and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "There's a lot more to tell." The battle was over. The war for her town, for justice, for the truth of what happened to Jane McLean and who else had suffered, was just beginning. And Madeline Kine, the former teacher, the widow, the grandmother, was ready for the next campaign.